Question for you. Have you ever made a sacrifice in order to win a prize? And the answer is yes. You probably have. So this past summer, I was on a family vacation. There's like 20 some of us. And I get a text from my wife saying, hey, everybody's going to the arcade. And I'm like, I hate arcades, right? Because you got to pay all the money, so the kids can get these big, long things of tickets. And, you buy something that you already have, right? A stuffed animal or some plastic lobster or something. And but I made a sacrifice, right? Because I love my kids, right? So I sacrificed my time, my money, my energy to go to an arcade so they can win a prize. Or you've probably seen these things, prize time, which should be entitled Parents Torture Time. My 6-year-old recently, she goes, hey, can we go to Walmart so we can get this? Because she had her eye on one of these prizes. And I was like, all right, so, I'm a good dad, right? So I took her to Walmart and, put the money in and wasted all the, and these claws that you get it lined up perfectly. You're like, oh, I'm going to win this for you, sweetie. And it goes down. It's always a swing and a miss, right? It always just misses the little toy. But, we do those kinds of things. We make sacrifices, whether it's time or money or energy, because we got a prize that we're going after. Now, in a serious note, you have made various sacrifices in order to win a prize. It might have been running a race, like completing the race or winning the race. It's like, I'm going to work hard and get up early and eat healthier and train so I can win the prize. Or maybe you were in a band competition. It's like, I want to win this prize. Or could have been getting the degree or getting the program or graduating. I'm going to make sacrifices in order to win the prize. Or maybe it was a hot dog eating contest, where you sacrifice something to be able to, win the prize of. I remember when Joey Chestnut won that contest years ago, and they interviewed him, and he's like, yeah, everyone thinks you just sit around all day and eat, but we train hard and we're disciplined, because you want to win the prize. Now, when you open up the book of 1 Corinthians, so if you've been doing this with us, if you've been around the church for several weeks, we gave everybody a Letters from Your Father book with the scriptures and devotionals and some questions. When you read 1 Corinthians, Paul assumes that everybody understands the biennial event called the Isthmian Games. So every other year, it's kind of like the Olympic Games. People come from all over the Mediterranean world. They descend upon Corinth, and Corinthian athletes make big sacrifices in order to win a prize in these biennial Isthmian Games. So you'll have runners, right, who train to be able to win a prize. You'll have wrestlers, discus throwers, javelin, boxers, and chariot racers. And the goal is that you would win a prize. And this is what the prize looks like. So every time Paul mentions the word prize, this is what is in everybody's mind, that they'll get a wreath that they'll be able to put on top of their head. And I don't know if they walk around their workplaces with a wreath on their head or if they just put in a trophy case. But that's what everybody's going after. And this is the mental image that the Corinthians have when Paul describes the prize. So Paul's going to use this metaphor of the Isthmian Games to drive home the prize that he really wants to talk about. Paul's prize, or if you're a Jesus follower, the Christian prize that we should all go after. And here's what he says, 1 Corinthians chapter 9, beginning with verse 19. Paul writes, though I am free and belong to no man. In other words, I just want you to know that I'm a free man. I'm not a slave. I recognize that when you walk through the city of Corinth, about 25% of the people are actually slaves. I'm a free man. However, I make myself a slave to everyone. Every time I show up in the room, I have the attitude that I am here to serve you. I'm here to be your slave. And they're like, well, that's pretty intense, because when I walk through the city of Corinth and I see people that look like this, I'm like, man, I would never want to be that. I would never want to be a slave. Most of these guys would become slaves because they were prisoners of war or they were in debt and they had to sell themselves to slavery. And Paul, as we talked about in Romans 13 a couple of weeks ago, said, Jesus paid your debt, but there is one debt that continues on and on and on, and it's the continuing debt to love one another. That every time you show up in a room, I'm here to serve you. I'm here to be a slave. It's not about me. It's about you. It's about loving you. It's about serving you. And you say, well, why would Paul do such a thing? Why would he become a slave to everyone? He says, to win as many as possible. I'll do whatever it takes to win as many people as possible to Christ. So the Corinthian prize is a wreath. Paul's prize is people following Christ. Now, here's the thing about Corinthians, and you don't get the questions necessarily, but you get Paul's answers. So he's getting these questions from the Corinthians, and he's answering their questions. So they're like, okay, Paul, I got a question for you. Paul's like, okay, yeah, you in the back, what's your question? He's like, how will you win the Jews? Because the Jews are not all that easy to reach. I mean, they grew up in a religious system where they memorize large chunks of the Torah and they celebrate the religious feasts, and every baby boy at the age of 8 days gets circumcised. I mean, they are committed. How are you going to reach the Jews for the gospel? He says, I'm glad you asked. Well, to the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. And it's like, well, Paul, you're a Jew. What do you mean you became like a Jew? He's like, oh, let me clarify. To those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. In other words, Paul says, the Mosaic law made up of 613 commandments. We're not under that anymore, right? I'm dead to the law. I've been released from the law. But if it means that I want to win somebody who's under the law, I'll gladly obey the law. Not for salvation, but so that I can win the Jews. Here's a really good example of this. One day, and this is recorded in Acts chapter 16, Paul meets this young man named Timothy. And we discover that Timothy has a mother who's a Jewess and a father who's a Greek. And in those days, you would do what your dad did. So he never got circumcised, even though he was half Jewish. And Paul's like, Timothy, I want you to follow me, and we're going to preach to the Jews. And Timothy's like, that's great. And he's like, but I got one thing I need you to do. I need you to get circumcised. Now, 8 days old, no big deal. But when you're a teenager or a young man and you're asked to get circumcised, that's a big deal. Right? And he's like, seriously, I got to do that? And Paul's like, yes. It's not for salvation purposes, but it's so that when you come in conversation with someone who's under the law and they discover that you're half Jewish, and if you're not circumcised, they'll be like, talk to the hand. Now, here's the pushback. It's like, okay, Paul, why would you make Timothy do that? You didn't make Titus do that. And Paul's like, well, yeah, that's because Titus was fully Gentile. Timothy was half Jew. And maybe Paul's audience is like, yeah, but Paul, you wrote in Galatians chapter 5, mark my words, I, Paul, tell you that if you let yourselves be circumcised, Christ will be of no value to you at all. You who are trying to be justified by the law have been alienated from Christ. You have fallen away from grace. So Paul, you wrote that in Galatians, and now you're telling Timothy he needs to get circumcised. And Paul will be like, I know. Here's why. Let me finish. He says this, the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love. It's not to get justified. You're justified in Christ. It's to win the Jews. So because he made this extraordinary sacrifice, Timothy did, the churches were strengthened in the faith and they grew daily in numbers. Paul's like, we're going to do whatever it takes to win the Jews who are under the law to Christ, even if it's uncomfortable. All right, let's do it. Any other questions? Paul says. Oh yeah, you got a question in the back? What's your question? Okay, how will you win the Gentiles? Because that's going to be difficult in the city of Corinth. You walk into the city, you see this big pagan temple that's erected to the goddess Aphrodite, the goddess of love, sex, and beauty, and people offer sacrifices. Or you go over here and you see the temple that's erected to the god Apollo. These people are thoroughly pagan. Now, we use the word pagan in a derogatory way, but in the scriptures, the word pagan just simply means you worship all kinds of different gods. He says, okay, that's a great question. Here's how I'm going to reach the Gentiles. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law. Though I am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. So I'm not under the Mosaic law, those 613 commandments. I'm not under that anymore, but rather I'm under the law of Christ, which is love your neighbor as yourself. And it gives an illustration. Here's an illustration. To the weak, I became weak to win the weak. Now you're like, what does he mean weak? Is he talking about like he stopped lifting weights so that he could relate to all the weak people? No, here's what he's talking about. And this is talked about in the previous chapters in Corinthians. This is what it may have looked like if you lived in the city of Corinth. Okay, you're a pagan, worship lots of different gods, and there's a pagan festival to the god Apollo or the goddess Aphrodite, and you show up with your cow. Costs you a lot of money for that animal. And you bring it to the pagan priest who kills the cow, burns part of its meat or its beef in order to feed the gods, in order to honor the gods, takes some of the other beef and gives it back to you as the worshiper so that you can have your meal to celebrate the pagan festival, and takes the other part of the meat as the priest for himself. That's how the priest would get paid. But here's the thing. You got a whole bunch of people coming to celebrate the pagan festival, and the priests severely outnumber the people, which means you've got all kind of extra meat lying around. You got New York strip, you got filet mignon, you got a T-bone steak, you got a porter. I could go on and on, but you got all this meat. And they're like, what do we do with all this meat? Let's sell it to the marketplace at a discounted rate. So they take the extra meat, they sell it at the marketplace, and Paul says, you can buy the meat at the marketplace. That's wise. It's good meat and it's discounted. No big deal. There's no such thing as Aphrodite. There's no such thing as Apollo. They're all fake. So just you can get the meat at the marketplace. No big deal. But he says, if there's a brand new Christian who has come out of a pagan lifestyle and spent years going to these feasts to honor the gods, his conscience is going to be, quote, weak, or his conscience is going to be sensitive. So when you're around that person, put the meat away, because you might create a stumbling block. You might offend that person. I mean, this is so radical. Paul's like, I'll do whatever it takes. He says this, therefore, if what I eat causes my brother to fall into sin, I will never eat meat again, so that I will not cause him to fall. All you meat lovers out there, can you imagine? I'll never eat bacon again, never eat a steak, never eat a burger. Not going to do it. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll make extraordinary sacrifices to win the Gentiles, to win those people who have come out of a pagan lifestyle. And here's kind of his big idea. He says, I've become all things to all men so that by all possible means I might save some. I'll do whatever it takes. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. And some of you in the room, and if you're watching online, who are Jesus followers and you've made sacrifices to see other people come to Christ, you would say, there's nothing better than sharing in the blessings of the gospel. Nothing that brings me more joy than that. He goes on, he says, do you know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Go after the prize. Go after that wreath, that crown. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. Corinthians, every time these games come around, you see all these athletes out there who have sacrificed so much to train so that they can win the prize. But they do it to get a crown that will not last. They do it to get a crown that fades away. Just like that mistletoe you put in your house that eventually just fades away. But we do it to get a crown that will last forever. We do it to get an eternal crown. Therefore, I do not run like a man running aimlessly. You know what a man running aimlessly looks like? It looks like someone running on a treadmill. So it'd be like, can you imagine the Apostle Paul coming back and seeing us all run on a treadmill? He'd be like, what do you do? Like, is there a prize for like what? Or I don't fight like a man beating the air, like, boxers who are like punching the air and shadow boxing. Paul's like, there's no prize for that. Why are you just running aimlessly? Why are you just beating the air? For me, it's different. I beat my body and I'm making my slave so that after I've preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. I'm going after a prize. I'm going after a crown that never fades away. And when you make a decision to do that, it requires sacrifice, right? It requires maybe being able to endure some criticism. I bet you Paul got some text messages from his buddies that said something like, Paul, why are you eating pork with pagans? You grew up in the church and you're holy. Why are you doing that? Or maybe he got a message from his other bro who's like, bro, it's not that deep. Just eat the meat. 6 of us who have teenagers understood that joke right there. It's not that deep. Just eat the meat. It's sacrifice. There's no such thing as idols. Just eat it. And Paul's like, no. Every time I show up in a room, I'm a slave to all. I'm here to serve you. I'm not here to serve myself. So if I got to eat the meat, I'll eat the meat. If I got to avoid the meat, if I got to be under the law, if I got to, whatever it takes, I'm going to do it because I'm going after the crown. And those crowns y'all get for chariot races and running, those are nice, but they're going to fade away. I'm going after an imperishable crown. So what do we do with this passage? What do we do with this? Because some of you are like, Dave, thanks for the history lesson, but I don't really struggle. I buy the cheapest meat. I go to Aldi. I don't care if it's like, what's this? I get my baby boy circumcised when he's 8 days old. What are we talking about here? How on earth do we apply this passage to a modern context 2,000 years ago, right? And this is the task of reading the scriptures, because I hope you haven't given up on reading the scriptures, letters to your father, the books that we handed out. And if you have given up, get back on the horse. Because God has a word for you, and he primarily speaks through his word, inspired by the Holy Spirit, and he's going to speak something directly to your life. So here's your application for today. This is what the Corinthian prize looks like. But that thing's fading away. Paul says you win people to Christ. That's the enduring prize. That's the eternal prize. So here's a question that I want to ask you as an individual. What sacrifices can you make to win people to Christ? What sacrifices? It's probably going to require some time, some emotional energy, resources. It's probably going to take sacrifice. Are you willing to do it for that person that you love, that you care about? And here's what we know, as Paul states, there is no one-size-fits-all approach. It's not like socks, which are great because it's one-size-fits-all. I go to buy socks and it's like size 6 all the way to 15, and I can just grab it and they all fit perfectly. I don't know how they do that with socks. But that's not the way it is with the gospel. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. Everybody's got a different history. Some people grew up religious and they got the law thing. Some people grew up like pagans and they think like pagans. Some people hate church. Some people are de-churched. Some people, you got to take time to, I like to say, a quote from somebody else, seek to understand rather than to be understood. Spend more time asking questions so you can discover the lay of the land, so that you can discover what kind of golf club to use in your conversations. Here's what I mean by that. Baseball, you use the same bat no matter what. Right? You get up to the plate, it's the same bat. Golf, sometimes you need a putter. Sometimes you need a sand wedge. Sometimes you just got to pull out the driver. You got to figure out the lay of the land. You got to ask people. You got to discern. It's going to take a little bit more sensitivity. And this is what Paul's saying. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. I speak to my 8th grade boys' small group on a Wednesday night much differently than I speak to my atheist friend who doesn't believe in the reliability of the New Testament. So we got to learn, and we got to grow, and we got to study so that we can win people to Christ. Speaking of golf, I love this story. I've shared this before about the guy who's golfs with his friend every Wednesday. And his friend says, hey, you want to go golfing with me on Sunday morning? And he says, no, I go to church on Sundays. All right. Next Wednesday, he says, hey, you want to go to church with me on Sunday morning? He says, no, I go to church on Sundays. Next Wednesday, hey, Sunday morning, weather's supposed to be nice, let's go golfing. He goes, I've told you 3 times that I go to church on Sundays. And he says to him, why is it that 3 times now I've invited you to play golf on Sunday morning, but not once have you invited me to go to church with you? And there might be somebody in your influence, your circle of influence or your orbit who's just waiting for an invite. Just invite them. Just invite them. Now, many of you are doing this because this is a really cool number. Since September 7th, we've had 53 first-time self-identified guests. That means they filled out a card or they checked their kids into kids' church. Probably we've had more than that, people who just kind of come in and leave and don't want to fill out their information. But that means that many of you are willing to make sacrifices to get the people that you love in church. So my second question, first question is, how can you make a sacrifice? Second question is, how can we as a church make sacrifices to win people to Christ? Now, I know that we're a regional church, right? And there's people here from PA and west of Avoca and all over the place. And, you know, there's millions of you watching online from all over the globe right now. But let's, just for this specific contest, like where we are in the Corinth Post School District, there's about 32,000 people. And I did a little bit of research this past week and texted some people to try to figure out how many of them are unchurched. And I almost put a number up there, but I'm like, let's just say the vast majority of them on a Sunday, church is the furthest thing from their mind. It's just irrelevant, right? How do we remove barriers so that those under the law, pagans, religious, de-churched, churches irrelevant, atheists, how do we remove barriers so that they can take their next steps towards Jesus? So just a couple of people, just shout it out, right? Just shout it out. What are some barriers of getting some of the unchurched folk to follow Jesus? Any ideas? 1 or 2 people? Shout it out. If you're online, you can shout it out too. Maybe we'll hear you if you shout loud enough. What are some barriers?
Be more welcoming when people who don't look like a standard Christian come to you. People that are covered in tattoos.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's people, I was talking to someone last night who was saying, yeah, a lot of the people I know, they're terrified to come into church because it's, what's going to happen? And church is irrelevant. God feels distant, right? There's all kinds of different barriers. One of the barriers is we are starting to get more people to come to the 9:15 service. And I said this to 8 o'clock, and I'll say it to you. This is the 10:45 service. Thank you for being at this service. As I said to 9:15, if you come to 8 o'clock or 10:45, you open up more seats and more parking for the others. So super grateful for those of you who are not in the 9:15 service. That is a blessing to me. Now, several months ago, I was up here preaching. At the end of my talk, I got down to the steps, service was over. I came down here, and my friend comes running up to me, and he says, I got a friend that I want to invite to church, right? But I've never invited him to church. I've never invited anyone to church. What should I do? And I thought, man, you're already 95% of the way there, because for those of us who have a passion for somebody in our life who's far from God, you're 95% of the way there. He just needed like a practical, because he had a relationship with this guy, spends a lot of time with him. I said, well, why don't you just pull out your phone and just text him right now? He's like, all right. So he pulls out his phone and texts him. Guy texts him back and says, I got a couple things going on. I'll be there in 2 weeks. Well, he ends up coming to church, bringing his family. And a few months ago, most of his entire family got baptized up here. And I was like, wow. So I texted my friend, and this is the actual text. I took a screenshot. I said to him, I hope you were blessed yesterday seeing this family get baptized. Must have been super powerful for you. I love making disciples with you. And he wrote, thanks, it was great. I feel privileged to be part of their story. I was blessed yesterday for sure. He got to be a part of winning some people to Christ. And you know what he got? He got a crown that will last forever. He got a crown, an imperishable crown that will last forever. Now, I don't understand how this all works. Theologians and scholars have, their views based on some New Testament passages that when you get to heaven, you'll take those crowns and you'll cast them at the throne of Jesus. I want to have some crowns that I can cast at the throne of Christ. I don't want to show up with just one of those cardboard Burger King crowns. Now, is it literal crowns or? Paul says, I'm going after the prize. And there's going to come a day for those of us who are justified, have received salvation, are saved, are cleansed. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about standing before the judgment seat of Christ and getting my reward and wanting to have a few crowns to throw at his throne because I took a part. I played a part in winning some people to Christ. So, what sacrifices can you make? Can I make? Can we make to win the prize of more people taking their next steps towards Jesus? What sacrifice is it? Is it time, money, relationship, prayer, emotional investment? Paul says, you do whatever it takes short of sin to win them to Christ. You do whatever it takes. And you might get uncomfortable, and you might get criticism, but it's worth it. It's worth it. So we're going to take this TV and slide it off to the side. The worship team's going to come up, and we're going to do a song that we've never done here on a Sunday morning. We do it all the time at youth group, and I was like, oh, we got to do this song. It's so good. It goes like this. For the sake of the gospel, for the glory of your name, I will go into the world and I'll say, love is on its way. God, do you want me to show up in my coworker's office? Do you want me to sit at the lunch table with my friend in 7th grade? Do you want me to write a text message to my friend? Because I'm here for you. I'm a slave of everybody. I'm fueled and motivated by the continuing debt to love one another. So every environment I show up in, whether it's church, whether it's a pagan temple, whether it's my classroom, whether it's my workspace, I'm showing up saying, here, love is on the way. How can I help? Let me hear your story. What's your background like? And God, I just this is a prayer that is a dangerous prayer, and it's an intense prayer, as John said this morning, right? It's like, I'll go anywhere and I'll do anything, God. Are you sure about that? Just put me where you want me. And for some of you, it might mean across the ocean. For most of you, it probably means across the street or across the office or picking up your phone and texting somebody and doing something uncomfortable, something that makes you a little nervous. Because earthly prizes are good. Right? Trophies are good. I may have mentioned that a couple times in the last year. Trophies are fun, but man, they don't compare with imperishable trophies. Because there is going to come a day where you're going to show up before the judgment seat of Christ. And man, I hope that we got a bunch of crowns on the top of our head that we can just lay at the feet of Jesus. That's going to be a great day. So, will you do whatever it takes? Whatever it takes, short of sin, to reach people for the gospel of Jesus Christ. Let's stand together and let's worship him with this song.